Good morning. I'm Fenwick Huss, Dean of the Zicklin School of Business. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. In this series, we're examining the new normal in business, and our focus today is on cybersecurity during the pandemic. Joining me from the Dean's office is Associate Dean Gwen Webb, who will moderate the question and answer period. We're delighted to have us for the conversation today, Anthony DeSantis, who's a Managing Director and Head of Infrastructure Technology at Neuberger Berman. From the Zicklin School of Business, we welcome Professor Trevor Moores, who's also the Director of the Subotnick Financial Services Center. And moderating our conversation today is Larry Zicklin, former Chairman of Neuberger Berman, alum of the school, and of course our school's benefactor. I'm also proud to say that Larry is a professor in our honors program. Larry?
Thank you very much, Dean Huss. Our timing today seems to be exquisite because when I opened the Financial Times this morning, I noticed that the hotel group Marriott was being sued by its constituent subsidiary hotels for a data breach that involved 7 million guests. And the data breach included names, addresses, telephone numbers, credit cards, passport numbers, and obviously part of a cybersecurity breach. And a week or two ago, I noticed that Capital One was fined $80 million for its data breach. So we seem to be in the middle of something important. Let me begin with either Trevor or Anthony. How would you define cybersecurity so we in the audience have the same definition?
I'll jump in. My definition is that cybersecurity is about protecting data on a network, and we're most interested in making sure that only authorized people can view the data. We call that confidentiality. And we're also interested in making sure that only authorized people can change it. So we call that data integrity. And we also have to make sure we don't forget the network itself, because if the network is damaged or brought down, then no one can access the data.
And if I'm assuming the people that can observe the data and the people that can change the data can be different people.
They can.
I'm assuming that everybody that can observe it can change it.
So everybody that can view it may not be able to change it. Correct.
And Anthony, at Neuberger Berman, and I should disclose, by the way, I'm on the board of Neuberger Berman, where Anthony is managing director. Anthony, who is empowered to change data at Neuberger?
Yeah, so there's a concept that we call access based on need, right? And what that means is that we only give, or we only try to give access to data based on the role of the person at the firm. So there's a lot of different roles involved obviously in every business. People who are required to change data, people who are required to view data, and then there's all of the sort of administrative roles, mainly on the technology side, that have similar access. And so there's definitely a large amount of concern about all of the access that you give, and you've got to really get a handle on managing who has access to what.
I'm assuming the auditors, the internal auditors at Neuberger, look at this access all the time to take a peek at who has access and why.
Yeah, so we have there's a lot of policy involved in managing security so that you can ensure that you've got standards that you live by. And one of those is ensuring that you've got data owners. And so across each data element in each business area, we identify people who are responsible for owning data. On a regular basis, those people are asked to attest to who has access and the level of access. And then our internal audit function follows on with that to ensure that those processes are actually being followed and that people are actually doing what's expected of them in that regard.
So you use not only the word access, but levels of access.
Absolutely, yeah. It's access and entitlements would be the other word. So you could have, again, the ability to change something or just the ability to view something. And there's many other entitlement levels, but that's at a high level.
So let's go to the problem at hand. Is cybersecurity a more difficult problem today than it was pre-pandemic? And if so, why?
So if I'll jump in here, there's a few reasons why I would describe as to why it's more of a problem now. One, we're all working from home or in some remote fashion, and we're on the internet more than ever before. That's work, that's school, that's shopping, that's ordering our dinner, that's webinars like this, with Zoom happy hours with our friends. All the things that we didn't used to do necessarily online, we're now doing all of them almost exclusively online. And therefore, the online risk increases. For corporations and schools, we all had to adjust very quickly to this environment, which means that we enabled new technologies or new ways of work that may not have been fully vetted from a security perspective. So in order to get people working properly, we may have had to open up things in a way that we wouldn't have in normal course. One of the other things I like to touch on is stress. I think the stress level of people in a pandemic, worried about our health, worried about our safety, worried about our children, we tend to be more susceptible to being socially engineered when we have high levels of stress. That's just sort of human behavior. So that's another thing that we worry about. And then the only other thing I would touch on is the fact that the bad guys of the world are also spending lots of time at home and have more time on their hands to think about creative ways to take advantage of us.
Yeah, I'd also like to mention that issue about people under stress and being open to social engineering. Now that people are out of their comfort zone and working from home, as a hacker, one of the easiest ways of breaking into a network is what's called a phishing attack, phishing with a PH rather than an F. And as a hacker, what I would need to work out is how can I get you as a user within the network to click on a document that includes a macro or some file that once you click on it, it'll download and infect your computer. And that's the way the hacker would get into the network. In this environment, it would be very easy for me to develop a phishing attack that would be so plausible to you that you would almost have to click on it. And one of the things I was thinking of, I was watching the news the other night, there's this new government agency called Test and Trace Corps. So if I really wanted you to be so enthusiastic to click on something, what I would do is craft a spreadsheet, and I would pretend the email came from this government agency and said something along the lines of, your name or a name similar to yours has been given to us as possible contact to a COVID-19 patient. But you have, because of HIPAA, you have to put in a password. And therefore, when you click on that Excel document, you're going to get that notice. I'm sure most people have seen before. Oh, this document has a macro. Are you sure this is from a trusted source? But you really want to know whether you have actually come into contact with someone. So you're probably going to click on yes. And once you do that, my macro is going to run. My virus is going to infect your computer. And I have some random names then. The email will say, if you don't recognize any of these names, then you're probably okay. So you'll close it down, you'll go away. And in the meantime, I've got access to your computer. So as a hacker, this environment gives me the ability to just come up with more plausible ways of launching that attack because of, as Anthony says, because of the stress that people are under.
Yeah, and just to that point, just real quick, Larry, when I looked at some of the statistics back in April, just sort of after the pandemic really hit some heights here in the US, we were seeing a 600% increase in the amount of phishing email that was being delivered to the firm. So, and that's sort of an industry-wide thing. So, the numbers are pretty staggering in terms of the amount of scams and social engineering attempts being made.
So I can't help asking the question, why do hackers hack?
Well, I mean, it depends on the who, right? So there's a number of different sort of categories of hackers. There's nation state. There's, sort of criminals that are, usually financially driven. There's people who have a sort of a mission. You think of some of these hate groups and things like that. So it depends on which category of bad actor we're talking about. In our industry, it tends to be financially oriented. Someone's trying to take advantage of someone so that they can steal money. That's usually what it comes down to for us.
Interesting. And so tell me something. Is an individual who works in the office more dangerous when that same individual works at home? from a cybersecurity point of view?
They are. They definitely are. And, there's, again, thinking a little bit about the psychology, I think when we're in our homes, we tend to be a little bit more relaxed. And I think that takes the edge away from people a little bit. We do a lot of education and awareness for people around things like phishing, which Trevor just described. And we hope that they hold the same sort of vigilant mindset when they're operating at home. But we just know that that's not always the case. There's more distractions at home. There's other things that go on. So people are definitely more, I would say, at risk at home. People tend to utilize more devices in their home. They have more computers, or more people are using them, which again can lead to higher levels of risk. So there's definitely more of a concern with people being home than anything else.
Are they using lesser quality hardware or software, or are they less careful at home?
I don't think it's
sorry. Go ahead, Trevor.
Well, I was just going to jump in and say, I don't think it's an issue of the quality of the machines. I think the biggest difference is that most people at home give themselves administrator access, whereas in the organization, they probably don't have that. So if I'm successful in getting into someone's home network, then I don't really have to worry about how can I, what's called, escalate my privilege up to administrator right. I've probably already got it as soon as I've got your home computer. So that's one of the biggest issues. Anthony?
Yeah, I would agree with that. One of the things about older devices and older operating systems and older software is there tends to be vulnerabilities in them that future versions corrected. And so one of the ways in which people can be taken advantage of is by leveraging those known vulnerabilities, those issues with your software, and taking control or gaining access. And so, that's one of the things, again, it's really about education and awareness and making sure people know to keep their software up to date. Ideally, they're using newer operating systems. And in some cases, we have to apply restrictions. So from Neuberger's perspective, we do verify the home operating system. We do verify that they have antivirus running on their computer. And there are certain steps that we can take to help ensure our security, but it also ends up helping them individually as well.
Well, that raises the issue. Is it more difficult to remediate a software problem or hardware problem from your central location and to my home when that happens, when there's a problem?
It is. One, I don't have necessarily access to your home computer, and I don't manage your home computer, right? So we provide remote access into our environment in a particular way. That way is essentially allowing you to remote control a computer within our network. So therefore, we can create a barrier between your in-office computer and your home computer, and that prevents things like data loss and other things. But we still worry about the home computer, and so again, I don't have the ability to manage it. But there is an expectation level that we support you and we help you connect, stay connected, work securely, all those kinds of things.
Is what happened at Marriott and what happened at Capital One typical of cybersecurity risks? Names, addresses, in this case, passports, credit cards, all kinds of personal information designed to extract some financial reward?
Absolutely. I think when you think about your organization and whoever you are, there's obviously something of value that you provide or that you have. It may be the services you provide, but it may be the data that you hold. And in these cases, the data was what the mission was, what the attacker was after. That data can be used to, identity theft, or potentially other forms of espionage, depending on who the attacker was. So these are the crown jewels. These are the things that every organization has to know. What are they, and what protections we have on them? Obviously, you want to prioritize your protections in your most sensitive areas.
Is the technology to protect data keeping up with the hacker's ability to break in? Okay, I happened to read of a story a week or two ago. You may remember better than me. where a 17-year-old broke into a system. When 17-year-olds can break in, how do you defend?
Yeah, so the issue to me isn't about the technology. It's usually about people and process. So we could have all the technology in the world applied in all the right places. The problem tends to be that there's people who work at the company on the inside that have access to do things with data because it's their job. Those are typically the people that are taken advantage of, whether they know it or don't know it. They may be socially engineered into giving away information or giving away access. So even if you've got technology control, that person's going to have access, and therefore if you can take control of their account, you're going to get the access you want. But there's also mistakes, right? I like to say that, you know, this may not sound great, but stupid hurts just as much as malicious. And what I mean by that is people make mistakes. You know, unfortunately, that's just human nature again. And so you may make a mistake that can lead to the 17-year-old or lead to the 7 million records being lost. I mean, it really only takes one person clicking on the wrong link in an email to get malware or to get ransomware or some form of, to allow some form of attack to begin.
I'd like to jump in and just say that 17 is nothing. I mean, there's cases of 12 and 13-year-olds being able to hack into even government institutions, because there are tools out there that anybody can download, and they are very powerful tools that can enable, with a few clicks of a mouse and a few commands, to launch very sophisticated types of attacks. So anybody that's just curious can find this stuff, download it, play with it. And as Anthony says, it may not be necessarily malicious, but they just happen to point it at your organization at just the wrong time, and they're in. So this is the arms race that we're in.
Yeah, and one thing to add to that, the ease for someone to download. I mean, there are online stores for these kinds of things, just like Amazon. So you think of how easy it is to go on Amazon and order yourself any product in the world. You could go online and order yourself malware and ransomware and all kinds of tools that allow you to breach a company. It's that simple.
It's hard to believe that those stores exist, that they're there for one purpose only, for hacking.
Yep. Yep. Largely they exist, you know, run out of countries that we don't necessarily, you know, want to name, but I think we all know who they are.
Right, and there's something called the dark web, so they're not necessarily websites like Amazon, but if you know what you're doing, you can find them.
So let's talk about the defenses a little bit. I know that, and Anthony, stop me if I'm wrong, once or twice a year, I, as a member of the Neuberger Berman team, and with an office at Neuberger, have to take an exam that tests my ability to resist phishing, among other things. How effective is that?
Well, it's one of many things, right? So what I like to, we use a strategy or maybe it's a philosophy that's called defense in depth. And so there isn't going to be one thing that's going to stop an attack or one thing that's going to help educate people. You've got to have layers of controls, and these layers are both technical and non-technical. So, you know, in the IT world, we do a lot of things that help protect the firm and our people from attack. You know, network controls, data and application controls, endpoint controls. There's lots of technology behind the scenes that people are largely unaware of. But non-technical controls, which, you know, awareness training is one of, is one of the most important things as a firm that we can employ, and educating people is one of those things. So how effective? It's hard to gauge. I mean, it's as effective of we haven't had a breach, so they're, you know, knock on wood. So it's that effective, but that could change any day. It's just one of these areas that, you know, when people ask me the what keeps you up at night question, the unfortunate answer is always our people, because they're our greatest asset, but they're also our potentially the weakest link in the chain.
The good news is that there are tools out there that can help support testing people response to phishing emails. So they're crafted to look like a good phishing email, but there's no effect. The only thing that would happen is that you would log whether someone did or did not click on that link, and hopefully they won't. So we have tools.
And we employ that as well. That's another one of the mechanisms we use for awareness and education. Everybody at our firm happens to get one. They get tested every month, with a random phishing test email.
In this question, I'm not particularly talking about, I'm not talking about Neuberger Berman in particular, but can we talk about the cost implications of this? It seems to me that the world post-pandemic will not look like the world pre-pandemic. I don't know what percentage of employees working from home now will continue to work from home, but I'm reasonably sure the numbers will greatly increase from what it was late last year. How much money can be spent on this, and how efficiently is money spent? I mean, there must be a point where more money is spent than the risks that exist.
That's a delicate balance in terms of how much money do you spend and how much risk are you mitigating with that spend. It's never an exact science because, like I said before, it doesn't take a lot for a breach to occur, and you can spend all the money in the world and you're not going to stop somebody from clicking on an email that they shouldn't. But it's a balancing act. It's risk and reward, and we try to make and everybody really in this industry tries to make clear what controls and what risks are you mitigating for the money you're spending. Where are your gaps? Right? I think it's really important for firms to understand and know where their gaps are and why those gaps exist, and perhaps why you're not spending to narrow them. It just may not make financial sense. The amount of money that could be spent, I don't know, it's probably, I won't say infinite, but you could keep spending and keep protecting, and you may not necessarily get the value for that spend.
I think also that COVID-19 has brought into sharp focus that cybersecurity is not just an enterprise issue. This is a personal issue as well, because Anthony mentioned ID theft. So, okay, the organization is going to be bombarded with malicious attacks, but so are you. I mean, how many times have you picked up a phone and it's the IRS who is demanding, Walmart cards because of some glitch in your taxes? Or you get a text message, and if you click on that link, your phone is going to be, or your laptop is going to be infected. So people need to also appreciate it. It's the way of life now. If we've got a digital life, then we need to protect ourselves as well as enterprises protecting themselves. And that's just the skill set that we're going to need if we're going to continue to use our smartphones and our laptops. It's just the way of life.
There are very few times that I'm glad I'm old. This is one of the times. Trevor.
But do you have a smartphone?
I do.
So there you go.
Trevor, is a school like Baruch or any other school different from a business? After all, we have the names of students. I assume we have their addresses, their phone numbers. In many cases, I assume tuition is paid by credit cards. We know something about credit card numbers. I assume we have lots of overseas students. We have passport numbers. How are our defenses organized? If you happen to know that, I know that's not exactly your field.
Well, I probably need Arthur here to answer the question about how we protect, but I would have thought that Baruch will treat the student information the same way that any enterprise treats its data sets. As you mentioned, there's names, social security numbers, credit cards if they are used. But the other thing to bear in mind is that an attack on Baruch isn't necessarily looking for student data. They may want to attack Baruch because they want Dean Huss's credentials, and then you craft an email that then attacks New York State. So an organization could be attacked just as a stepping stone. But in terms of the information, it's exactly the same. So any loss of student that's called personally identifiable information allows someone to set up credit card accounts, ID theft, and that will come back to, so who lost my data? And that would be Baruch. So all of the things that Anthony's talked about in terms of you must have defense in depth. You have to be very careful about who has the rights to access any particular sets of data. We need to separate people. They call it least privilege. So you only have access to the data that allows you to do your job. All of that will be exactly the same for Baruch.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, one of the things that, again, if we think about the remote work environment that we're all in, oftentimes people make a choice out of convenience in terms of how to do their job. And so working remotely isn't always necessarily the best way for someone to work. And they may say, you know what, this file or this thing I need to do would be better if I just ran it on my local computer. Or let me copy it, or let me email it to myself, or let me put it in my cloud storage solution. And those are the things that, again, tend to lead to some kind of loss. And so there's, again, back to the awareness, which I think is a really important part of this, is making sure that all the people doing those functions who have access to that really sensitive information for your organization know what to do. I like to stress the what to do versus the what not to do. I mean, a positive reinforcement tends to work better, but certainly you've got to have a view of making sure people know what not to do.
Are we at a point where cybersecurity can be decentralized and the security can take place in the computer of the resident, of the user? Is that happening, or is it all centralized cybersecurity?
Well, my view is that there's such a broad number of ways in which someone can get infected that you really got to think about all the different defenses. Again, Anthony talked about defense in depth. So the user has to take on some responsibility. So we mentioned about the phishing attacks. You've got to know what a phishing attack looks like. But also, even if it's not a phishing attack, if it's a telephone call, any sort of communication, you've got to have an understanding of what seems right and what doesn't seem right. But attacks can also be very technical. They can be scanning your servers, they can be scanning your routers, they can be looking for any particular host computer that has an old version of an operating system on. People can't really watch that happening in real time. You're going to have a technical solution to do that, which means a piece of software which is going to be looking for this type of behavior on the network. All of that has to be included. It can't just be the person sitting at their computer who...
Well, what I was thinking was of advanced biometrics. I'm thinking of iris scan, retinas, fingerprints. Is this all the future of cybersecurity?
And chips. I mean, there was a Swedish company, I think, that actually put chips in their people so they didn't have to carry cards. They would just be able to be recognized when they went through. So there's all sorts of things you can do on biometrics, that's for sure.
Where was the chip?
They would implant the employees with a chip. Like
in your physical
pet, they would put a chip in. Yeah, so rather than having a card and scanning it, because they have the chip in their hand, they would just go up to the handle of the door and it would recognize who it was. I mean, I wouldn't do it personally, but they can go as far as that.
Talk about invasion of privacy. Oh,
yeah, but I think that topic of biometrics and how you authenticate who you are to the system is still an area that has lots of opportunity in it, because we all know that passwords are not very secure. Passwords is what we've all been living by. My guess is if I had to poll everybody in the audience here, we'd probably find that a lot of people use the same password or very small variations of the same password for lots of things, which is one of the worst things you can do is in terms of how you manage your password. So I think biometrics, I think artificial intelligence, I think there's a lot of opportunity in that regard for authentication.
Are you seeing a lot of new technology coming on using biometrics?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely been a lot, with regards to, fingerprint and facial recognition. And then this, what Trevor mentioned as well with chips. I think that one has more, personal or even political sort of angles to it, which, people worry about invasion of privacy and who's tracking me and all that. So it's, again, it's one of these things that's sort of like a balance. Your fingerprint translates to something, your face ID translates to something, which can still be stolen. I mean, that's one of the downsides of even thinking about biometrics. It's like, I'm the only one with this face or I'm the only one with this fingerprint, but that translates to some sort of digital certificate or digital password, if you will, which can still be compromised. It's all about the level of risk. There's never going to be an answer that says, okay, now we've got it. This is the way in which we're going to secure everybody. There's always going to be risk. There's never going to be a zero risk outcome, unfortunately.
Anthony, tell me about your job a year ago and your job today. How has it changed?
Well, like I touched on, I think with the remote workforce, that's really been the largest change is how do we manage and ensure that people are following the same practices at home that we would expect them to in the office. And, one of the ways in which, that it's changed dramatically is, unfortunately, it's paper. People aren't in the office anymore, and therefore, if they print, they're printing at home. That's a lot of sensitive information that ends up on someone's countertop in their home that I worry about how they're securing and how they're disposing. We have rules, right? There are regulations in our industry and in many others that tell you how you must handle that kind of information and how you must dispose of that information. And so getting people, again, educated and aware of what they're supposed to be doing is challenging. The other thing I would mention is just in general, and it's not just the last year, it's been a trend for a while now, is the regulations. The global regulatory landscape is changing. It's very oriented around people's privacy and who owns the data. The information about you as an individual is yours. You give it to a company for the purposes of service, but it's still yours. And that's really changed a lot about how we view data privacy and how we view data protection.
You talk about data protection. I just got an inquiry from some company I have an investment in, a private company, and they wanted my Social Security number for tax purposes because they've got to identify me to the IRS that they're paying a dividend or whatever. But they also wanted my bank account information, so if there's a dividend check, they can send it to me. And I'm thinking to myself, my Social Security and my bank, you could withdraw money, you could do anything. You know my name, you have my Social Security number, you have my bank number. What protects me? And I can't think of anything, but I don't know the alternative. So it's
and there isn't much of an alternative in that regard. Again, that's about how we as organizations and business do our business, right? So in the current case, to open a bank account, to put money in the bank account, we need those numbers. So do we need to rethink how we operate, how our business functions, and is it even a possibility? I mean, that's something to really think about.
I was thinking the other day when I went to a local bank to make a cash withdrawal, the teller in my bank, who was a minimum wage worker, has more information about me than my son. It's frightening.
Yeah. So one of the things as a company that, and I'm sure, everybody on this call will appreciate this, is we all leverage third parties to conduct our business. We don't completely do everything in-house in most cases. And that may be, even as an individual, you use a bank, you don't keep the money, locked in a safe in your bedroom. So the due diligence that we do on our third parties and the obligations that we hold them to, the standards that we hold them to, have to be similar to what you would expect that you would do yourself. And that in and of itself is a whole nother series of work and protections that go into the overall program. Again, if I use the same term I used before, our defense in depth strategy includes third-party risk management. And as an individual, that's really no different. You don't want to give your money to a bank that perhaps has had a track record of loss or theft or burglaries and things like that. Sometimes you got to know those things. You got to do the due diligence.
How many banks haven't been hacked? I think if I look back, they've all had a hack job. Trevor, can I ask you a question? You teach cybersecurity. How has your teaching changed over the last year, or has it?
I think the basic concepts and principles are the same, and we've discussed some of them here. But the examples that I can give in the classroom have probably changed. But in terms of COVID-19, I haven't quite got there yet. So I'm teaching in the fall, maybe I can use it. But there's lots of examples of, as you've mentioned, banks getting hacked, the information that they've had taken, and the way in which you try and defend against that. But the principles of cybersecurity have been around for quite some time. We talked about least privilege. That was in a paper written in the mid-1970s. So people have understood the nature of data on computers, and it needs to be protected. The issue is that until outsiders, malicious hackers, worked out that not only was this fun, they could make a lot of money, and that was typically around the late 1990s maybe. By then, people realized that you've got to take this seriously. And enterprises have been taking it seriously since then. But now we've got the focus because of, I think, COVID-19, people working at home, that it is also an individual requirement. You personally must be able to protect yourself.
Trevor, do I remember that Baruch College now has an MS degree in cybersecurity?
It has a track in the master's and in the undergraduate. We have about 130 majors at the undergraduate. I don't know what the latest count of at the master's was, but it was in around 9, 10, 11, something like that, but it could have grown. I know the classes in cybersecurity, for instance, have grown from about 15 or 20 at the graduate level. And in the fall semester, we've got something like 55. So the interest from the students is certainly there as well.
And that, Larry, if I could mention, is a really important step in again, the overall sort of efforts around security in this, I'll say in the world. I don't try to be dramatic, but you know, if you look at the landscape of open job opportunities, there's a negative employment rate for cybersecurity jobs, meaning that there are not enough skilled workers to fill all the jobs that are available. And so we need, you know, Baruch and others to have programs like this, because it wasn't this way 5 years ago. It would be hard for you to find a college in the United States that had a cybersecurity program, maybe a class or two, but not a program. So it's a really important step, in my opinion, is the education of the future workers to fill these jobs that we have needs for.
We ought to bring you to the college, Anthony, to talk to our students and persuade them there's a great economic opportunity out there. Take advantage of it.
I'd be happy to. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
It's walking distance. Before I turn this over to Gwen, when I listen to all this, I must admit, I come to the conclusion there are two kinds of institutions in the world: the ones that have been hacked and the ones that are going to be hacked. I don't know if that's unfair, but I find it absolutely frightening. Gwen, what do we have from the audience?
Well, we have quite a number of questions here. Let's start. The first one is, it seems that anything can be hacked. It also seems very expensive to implement and maintain defenses to cyber risk while technology is always changing. Can a business compartmentalize the risks in a cost-effective way? Or how might they be able to do that?
So the way in which we try to do that is by identifying our crown jewels, as we call them. So what's important to this company? And everybody, you know, again, has those. And put your best defenses around those things. So where you have personally identifiable information or intellectual property or whatever it is that's important to you, and making sure that you have the right controls and you're spending the right amount of money there versus trying to spread it across the whole environment, and you're not going to get the same benefit and probably less valuable information or assets. So you definitely have to prioritize your focus.
If you think about it, for an investment management company like Neuberger Berman, the critical part, at least for me, Anthony, please differ with me, is the names of the clients and their wealth.
Mm-hmm.
No client wants to worry that their name, address, and the amount of their security holdings will be made public. That would be
Absolutely.
a catastrophe.
Absolutely.
Trevor, would you like to add anything to this?
Right, I'd just like to emphasize, it's really, as Anthony said, an issue of risk and how much money you have. So you have to identify what would be the catastrophic loss, and there the money must go. Then you would identify, well, what would be good to protect, and if you have the money, then you could take that next step. But it is a balance. But you do have to, whatever is fundamental to your organization, as Larry's just said, that information, you must protect. Absolutely.
Oh, thank you all. The next question, how does an individual protect himself or herself when using a hotel internet, the college internet, any other similarly public or public Wi-Fi? And also, if you inadvertently get hacked, what do you do?
So what I'll start with by saying is that public Wi-Fi is very, very dangerous. What I like to use as sort of an analogy is, would you walk into Starbucks and just out loud say your social security number and your bank account number and your home address and all that kind of information? Likely not. Therefore, assume the same is happening on public Wi-Fi when you're operating and sharing information or just using your smartphone or computer. So to combat that, there's a technology called a VPN, a virtual private network, these are consumer products that people can purchase. They're pretty low cost per month. Essentially, what that will do is enforce encryption in your session while you're on public Wi-Fi or hotel Wi-Fi, or I'm sure Baruch has sort of a public network and a private network. So if you're on the public side, again, using something that ensures encryption is in place is the most important. There's a couple other things there around protecting yourself. I mean, I think there's a laundry list of things that all of us can be doing to protect ourselves. At a high level, keeping software up to date is really important. Managing your passwords and not reusing passwords. And I would say I'm trying to eliminate the word password for a while now, using the word passphrase, because that suggests something that's longer. The longer the passphrase, the better. If you take like an 8-character password and you run a tool against it to hack it, you could probably do it in minutes or less. If you take something that's 15 or 18 characters and you're measuring that in years, and in some cases millions of years. And so it's dramatic, the difference in the security of a password the longer that it is.
So each character you add to a password is a geometric or an algorithmic change?
Yeah, because the tools that are used are called brute force. Essentially, it's an attack that just randomly keeps trying every combination of 8 characters or 9 characters or 10 characters. You can imagine, the numbers just escalate in terms of the number of years it would take. And this is, again, today's technology. As technology advances, that number comes down, which is why we need to make them even more and more complex. So at some point, it's why the biometric conversation comes into play, because past phrases are still at some point going to be able to be taken advantage of if you think about quantum computing and what that potential for that has.
If I could just jump in as well, I think Anthony's point about using a VPN in a public network, this is one of the things that people just have to know in their daily life, that that's the way that they should behave. The question also asked about what do you do when you get hacked? If it does happen, then really it depends on what style of hack it is. The antivirus may be able to find it and clean it, but in the worst case scenario, how many people listening to this webinar have a backup of all their information? If you don't, then that's the risk that you're taking.
Well, can I stay on that topic for a second? And I would ask both Trevor and Anthony this. What is the implication of the cloud in cybersecurity? Is it protective, or does it create more dangers?
It creates, I don't know that it creates more dangers. I think it tends to give people, people hear about cloud and they think, okay, if it's Microsoft or if it's Apple, then it must be secure. In a lot of cases, the cloud providers give you the responsibility of the security. And so it's sort of like a shared responsibility model. They provide you the capability to secure, you have to secure it, which comes with understanding, the tools. So what's available to me? What can I password protect? What can I encrypt? How do I control who has access and the level of access? And that takes a little bit of effort. But I don't know that I would say the cloud changes that. It makes it more available, which I guess in that regard increases the risk.
We have a related question here. Is there a VPN option on home computers, and what are the pros and cons of using it?
Yeah, like I said, in sort of the consumer world, there are VPN technologies that people can use on their home computers or their mobile phones. You know, the pros are you're going to guarantee encryption point to point from where you are to where you're going. The cons, I would say, is in some cases, depending on the VPN you select, you may see some performance issues. So you're connecting essentially your device to a central location. That's how you're creating that encrypted connection. That other location, depending on where it is in the world, may be the reason why something may appear slower than it was before. So the distance between you and your destination may change.
Yeah, there are companies out there like ExpressVPN and NordVPN. They charge somewhere between $5 and $10 a month. The only issue that I would maybe bring up is that you use the VPN because you don't trust the local network, but then you also have to trust the company that you're using as your VPN provider. I wouldn't say there's a problem, but it is an issue.
Thank you both. We're going to take a little change here. The question is this: do you think there's a strong reason now for local and federal governments to bear the cost of dealing with cybersecurity breaches as public goods, assuming that the cost might extend beyond the ability of firms and individuals?
I would say no, because that creates something called a moral hazard, which is if someone else is going to pay for the problem if it happens, then you're less likely to show the right behavior. And if it's my tax dollars that's going to pay for you not bothering to do the right thing, I wouldn't be very happy.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. I think the federal, state, and local governments have enough to protect that they're already not protecting well enough for them to be worrying about the rest of us.
I would agree, but I would ask the question of our two experts: is the internet a public good, no different than electric or gas or water? And should that be a regulated industry? I mean, everybody has to be attached to the internet now. You can't go to school, you can't work, you can't do anything without the internet. Why isn't that regulated the way the electrical industry, the utility industry is regulated?
Well, I mean, there are some regulations, and depending where you are in the world, those can be more restrictive than others. And think about China. I mean, they block things like Facebook. So there's definitely some control out there in the world. I think you're right. I think it bears a conversation about the obligation, given the fact that we're all so highly dependent on it. But it wasn't born that way, and I think there's a lot of people that feel like it's a utility that shouldn't have that kind of regulation attached to it. And perhaps there's a point in the process here where we look to separate these things. Maybe there is a sort of a corporate version of this where we operate. I mean, big cloud providers like Amazon and Microsoft are carving out areas of their infrastructure specifically for industry or for government. And so perhaps the internet could also have similar capability.
Just think of what's going on now, where not everybody, great many young people are learning from home. If you don't have a computer or you don't have access to the internet, you can't learn. You can't go to school.
Absolutely, yes. This debate has been going on in the IS discipline since the mid-1980s. We call it the digital divide. So those that have access to the internet, information is power. If the internet provides you with information, then those that have it are going to benefit more greatly than those that don't. And there are even suggestions that it's so important that there should be public support for those people that can't afford an internet connection.
Thank you all. The next question is for Anthony. You are Managing Director, Chief Information Security Officer, and Head of Infrastructure Technology of a major investment advisory firm. Aside from investment risks, what cyber risks do you feel are most relevant to the investors who are your clients? And in general, what is Neuberger Berman doing to mitigate these risks?
Yeah, so I would say that the most important thing, if I was an investor, that I would be worried about first and foremost, I'd be worried about some kind of fraud that was able to take advantage of me and in turn, the company. And so there's some sort of financial loss to me. That would be first and foremost in my mind. But what's behind that, I think, is where, again, I go back to this concept of defense in depth, because it isn't necessarily going to be, the attack may not happen the way I think it's going to happen. The fraud may not start with an email. And so, for us, it's how do we protect our clients? So, again, we want to educate them and make sure that they understand how we operate, what our processes are, how to request money to be wired, and make sure that we have this understanding about those kinds of things. But also then, who are the people at our company that are capable of making those mistakes and wiring that money to the wrong bank account because they didn't follow our process. And so, social engineering and phishing are paramount. Defending against fraud, I think, again, as an investor, that would be what I worry about.
Okay.
Would you also say, Anthony, for those who don't know that there are levels of protection in that at Neuberger itself, there is no money and there are no securities. That's another level at various banks where the money and securities are. So there's our level of security, and then there's, I'm using JP Morgan's level or Fidelity's level.
Mm-hmm.
So there's secondary and tertiary levels of security, which is
absolutely. Yeah, that's a very important point. And that's, before when I mentioned third-party risk management, that's what I mean. It's understanding those companies that you use for a variety of services, and in those cases, they may be the bank that has the money. So we want to make sure that they also employ similar protections that we would expect.
All right, thank you, Anthony. This question is for Trevor. Cybersecurity risks include issues of privacy and confidentiality that are inherently legal in nature as well as technical in nature. Would you describe the key areas in which legal and cyber risks overlap and intersect?
So many. Give you an example. There was an advert many years ago. If anybody listening can find it on YouTube, because I'd love to have a copy. There are two people at a bar, and they're chatting with each other. They're obviously getting along very well. One asks the other one for their telephone number and writes it down, gives it to the first person. And then two other people come up to them and say, I'll give you $10 for that telephone number. And the first person says, yeah, sure. And of course, the person that gave them the telephone number is absolutely, furious. What's going on here? I've given you some personal information. What do you think you're doing with it? And then you think about people that sign up for free services like LinkedIn or Gmail or Yahoo Mail, and they give, or Facebook, and they give so much of their personal information away. So why would we be upset about someone selling someone's telephone number if we're so willing to give away our personal information in another environment? And that's where the law comes in. They say, well, if it's in a private setting, you should not be able to sell someone's information. That's just, that's a very bad thing to do. But if there's an exchange, and that's where the legal comes in. Well, if there's an exchange, if I've given you a service and in return you give me information, and in my terms of service, I tell you that I'm going to package this information and sell it. Well, how many people read the terms of service? But legally, you've entered into a contract with that provider. So the law has to catch up. And in Europe, the privacy laws are a lot more stronger than in the US. And even between states, there can be differences between those privacy laws. So I think privacy is the biggest issue. But who should be responsible if there is a hack? Now, if we all agree that there are companies that have been hacked or about to get hacked, then the company could say, well, what do you expect me to do? I've done my best, and they were just better than me. So am I still responsible for giving you free credit monitoring service? Is there any financial payment that I have to give to you because you're a victim of ID theft? All of these issues have to be covered in the courts. The law has to say whether or not the company is going to be responsible and to what extent. So I think those are some of the major issues.
Gwen, you should know that there's a great controversy now in the securities industry. I'm sure Anthony's aware of this, about Very.
We lose Larry?
But free is not exactly free, because while the execution is done free of charge, the information is sold in many ways, sliced and diced to an extent you wouldn't believe. And there's controversy at this moment.
All right, we have time for one last question, and this one, Larry, is for you. What is the perspective on cyber risks of the CEO and the board of directors? And I especially want you to address the issue of board of directors and CEOs who are business people and not technology people. In general, what questions do they need to ask of their chief technology officer? How can they evaluate and assess what the CTO is telling them?
Well, as I mentioned, I sit on the board of Neuberger Berman. Number one is people. You've got to have people like Anthony who care about the firm. We're fortunate at Neuberger, and this is not a plug particularly for Neuberger, our turnover is de minimis. So we are secure in that we have good people that stay with us. We try to hire the right people. And then you have to ask the right questions. I happen to chair the audit committee at Neuberger. And so I'm always talking to our internal auditor. Have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? Have you considering this? Where are our problems? What are you seeing? Who do you talk to? I get ideas from the outside. When I read the Capital One piece, or I read, as I did today, the Marriott piece, I will talk to our internal auditor and say, how could this happen? What should we be looking for? Should we be adding to what we're doing on our internal audit? Now, is it perfect? I doubt it. One of my early mentors used to say about the securities markets, they always get you another way. And I'm sure that while I'm asleep at night and while Anthony's sleeping at night, there's somebody awake trying to figure out how to break in. But you try to have good people, good systems, you spend an adequate amount of money, and you hope you're right.
All right. Thank you all, Larry Zicklin, Trevor Moores, Anthony DeSantis, for a really compelling session on cybersecurity risks after the pandemic. Our next webinar will be a month from now on Tuesday, September 15. The title is The Price of Being Unprepared, COVID-19 in Healthcare. Larry and two guests will explore the impact and implications of the pandemic for healthcare with specific focus on supply chain issues. The guests are going to be J.C. Alejandri. He is an administrator at the New York Presbyterian Hospital and a graduate of our Executive MBA in Healthcare Administration program. And our other guest will be Professor Alex Mills from our own management department, and he is the academic director of that very same program. So we're looking forward to that in a month from now. We hope that you'll all join us, and thank you again, Larry, Trevor, and Anthony.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.